We're now going to explore how the grid can be used to make a simple layout like you would find on something like a blog. So maybe instead of this being a div, maybe we could call this a header, because we want that to be a header. Maybe inside here we want this to be a navigation bar, so we might call this nav instead. Then this might be a sidebar, so let's call it an aside. And this might be a footer. So we're using the HTML5 semantic tags there. That won't have changed anything whatsoever, but let's go back to our CSS and start exploring that. So we're picking up our CSS exactly as we had left it last time. And now we're going to talk to our header. And in our header, we want this to be 1 row down and we want it to be 4 across. So there's different ways we could write that. So one way is to use this grid column, starting at 1 and going 4 across. Now we only have 3 columns, so you might ask yourself, how are we going 4 across? Well, it actually counts in between these sections. So this is like 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're known as tracks in between. So while we've got the columns where the content is, there's like a track in between each one, and that's what that refers to there. We could also say, if we wanted to, grid row 1. Now if we look back at this now, we can see that the header section goes right the way across the top. To make this look more like a header, let's increase the height of this. And it's worth noting that in order to do that, we're going to have to put this important on the end. And the reason for that is because the cell already has a height and the cell is inside the header. So if we look at this, we can see here the header, and that will get its basic formatting, but then there's a class inside of there. So the class then will be the last thing that it picks up and attaches to it. So it would put it back to 100 pixels. So if we see that now, we will see now we've got the 300 pixels that's there. Let's do the nav, and we'll copy all of this content. We'll make that 30 pixels, and this one here is, again, it's going to go all the way across, but it's going to start at grid row 2. Now it's important to notice that if we got rid of that, it still starts there because it's the next available slot. You don't have to put this in at all. It's just useful to know that you do have the option of specifying an exact slot. It always goes for the next available slot. So this would be the aside right here, because that's the next one that's down. So we could even recognize that by putting header there, nav, aside, and then footer. And we can see that reflected, and we can see the footer there. Let's do the aside. Now we want this to be just 1 column across, but we want it to go down perhaps 2 sections that we've got below it. So in order to do that, there's a good way of doing it. Rather than say we want it to start at 1, or because we don't know necessarily where this is going to be 1, 2, 3, it's at 3 going down to 5 maybe. That kind of starts to get a bit confusing. So an easier way of doing it is to say grid row end, and then say just span 2 rows going down. Then we'll just change the 30 pixels to auto. Let's check that out. And now we can see there's the aside spanning 2 sections going down. We can see there we've got 2 rows, and it's going down to fill that space in there. These automatically just fill in because they've not been told where to go the next available slots that are available in the grid. So we can see in a moment we're going to put the footer, and we're going to make it span 3, so it's going to go down to the next section that's here. And there's a similar way of doing the grid row end with grid column end, and we can just tell that to span 3, and we'll leave the height off this one. And there we can see, because it was told to span 3, it can't fit in that slot anymore where it was before, which is why it was important to show that. It instead goes down to here where it can slot across to 3. So be aware that once it reaches the spot where it can't go anymore, it moves down and goes to the spot where it can fulfill what you're specifying in CSS. So that's really important to know, and it gives you an idea there of how this actually works. So there we are. There's a very simple kind of blog style layout with a sidebar, a header, menu, and footer section, and then possibly posts that you might find over here.